The ancient city of Troy remained a mythical place until 150 years ago, when archaeologists discovered what they believed to be the very location that Homer spoke about.
For centuries, the world believed the mythical Trojan cities existed only in Homer's pages. Stories of wars, heroes, and kingdoms swallowed by time. But just when historians thought the last secrets of the ancient world were gone forever, Greek archaeologist Elena Korka stunned the world. Her team uncovered a city so well preserved, so unexpectedly real. Schlein was seduced by archaeology's potential to unite his two great passions, making money and the legendary story of Troy. That experts everywhere were forced to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about the Trojan world. And yes, it had been hidden for 3,000 years. This is the story of how a legend materialized into stone, how a whisper from the past revealed a city beneath our feet, and how one discovery shook the entire archaeological community. Today, we're diving into the shocking uncovering of the mythical Trojan city of Tana. And trust me, you'll want to stay until the end, the day they finally found it. At first, it looked like the beginning of a wall, just a line of cut stones peeking through the soil. But as they widened the trench, the wall didn't end. It kept going and going and going. According to coverage from the BBC and the other archaeologists, that moment changed everything. The team quickly realized they weren't uncovering an isolated structure. They were revealing part of a massive settlement. Foundations of buildings with intact door frames emerged from the dirt. Carefully laid flooring appeared beneath centuries of soil. Even clay pipes, still holding their form after 3,000 years, came into view. This was no scattered ruin. It was a city plan waking up. That's when the whispers started on site. Is this it? Could this really be Tana? But the true shock, the moment that left archaeologists stunned, wasn't the walls or the pipes. It was what they found inside the structures. Burial chambers, pottery, decorated in patterns found only in regions associated with post-Trojan migrations. Coins bearing the unmistakable symbols of a city with international trade connections and artifacts that match descriptions in Pausanias's ancient writings. Details so precise that even skeptical researchers had to pause and reevaluate their positions. And then came the clincher, a burial containing the remains of individuals who showed cultural markers linking them to Trojan ancestry. Not theory, not legend, actual physical evidence. And as new excavations pushed deeper, additional buildings, graves, and even entire street networks emerged, all untouched since the Roman period, preserved beneath centuries of soil like a time capsule, waiting 3 millennia for someone to lift the lid. This was no random village. This was a city planned with care and built with pride, and rooted in an identity that stretched all the way back to Troy. Yet even with all these stunning finds, Elena Korka remained cautious. She said the city speaks slowly, revealing its secrets layer by layer. This was only the beginning, a first glimpse into a civilization hidden for 3,000 years, which raised a bigger question. If this was the opening chapter, what else lay buried beneath the ground? What other Trojan mysteries waited to be uncovered? One thing was clear. They finally found it, and the world would never look at ancient Greek history the same way again. But the truth is, the city never truly vanished. Its story had been alive in old writings centuries before the earth gave it back. When myth starts speaking, how legend became reality. The trail leads back to the very first hints of Tana in ancient writing. The earliest references appear like scattered echoes, brief notes in epic poetry, passing remarks in Greek histories, and curious descriptions of a community between Corinth and the road to Argos. Ancient writer Panias described it as a thriving city, wealthy and proud, with cultural ties to Asia Minor. But for centuries, historians argued over whether this meant literal descendants of Troy or simply a blend of Greek and Eastern populations. Even in those snippets, there was something unusual. The text described a people confident in their identity, distinct in customs, and wealthier than anyone expected. Still, no one expected to find physical proof. It was specific enough to intrigue historians, yet vague enough to frustrate them for centuries. What puzzled scholars for centuries wasn't just what was said about Tana. It was the consistency. Tana kept showing up in unexpected historical corners, in genealogies, in lists of ancient sanctuaries, even in merchant records, suggesting a town of influence. These weren't dramatic mentions, they were subtle reminders. It was as if Tana remained just visible enough to stay alive in memory, but hidden enough to avoid discovery. And that's where the legend gained weight. Some ancient accounts hinted that the people of Tana held on to customs foreign to the Greek mainland, unusual artistic motifs, distinctory patterns, and rituals that suggested earlier roots from outside the Peloponnese. But without excavation or ruins, these claims floated in academic limbo. Was Tana a real community preserving much older traditions? Or was it simply a story repeated until it felt true? For generations, researchers debated that question. Some believed Tana had to exist. No myth stays that stable unless it comes from something real. Others argued it was a literary invention, a convenient origin story designed to make a local community seem ancient and important. The stalemate lasted for centuries. Then, a slow shift began. Archaeologists at sites across the Aegean started uncovering evidence of population movement in the aftermath of the Late Bronze Age. Migrations, cultural blending, communities forming far from their homelands. These discoveries didn't mention Tana directly, but they made the legend feel more plausible. If displaced groups were resettling across the Mediterranean, the idea of a unique, culturally mixed city suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. And that's when Tana moved from myth to possibility. Because if Tana was real, then it offered something almost unheard of. A direct link between the world of epic poetry and the world of archaeology. A bridge between legendary events and real communities shaped by them. For centuries, that bridge existed only in theory until the day the ground finally opened and myth stopped behaving like myth. What surfaced next wasn't just a lost city. It was the story of how one rose, flourished, and then slipped off the map entirely. The rise and fall of a forgotten city, before the city vanished into silence for nearly 3,000 years. Tana lived through a life cycle that historians still marvel at. Ancient accounts hinted at a community that didn't just survive, it thrived. Tana was a city that rose quickly, flourished generously, and stood proudly among the Greek polis for centuries. But how does a city with such prestige disappear so completely that experts spent thousands of years uncertain whether it even existed, let alone uncover where it once stood? That contradiction is the heart of Tana's story. According to the myth, the city was founded by Trojan prisoners who were resettled by Agamemnon following the destruction of Troy. This alone made Tana unique. Its roots were tied to one of the greatest epics ever told, and unlike many war-torn communities rebuilt under foreign rule, the people of Tania weren't described as oppressed. Pausanias writes that they were allowed a degree of autonomy, permitted to retain parts of their culture, their identity, and perhaps even their language. This autonomy seeded a distinct civic identity, one that would eventually set Tana apart from neighboring cities. As excavations confirmed, through architecture, graves, and material culture, Tana was wealthy, very wealthy. The city minted its own coins, a privilege granted only to cities with strong economies. Positioned along key routes linking Corinth to the Peloponnese, it benefited from the steady movement of traders, travelers, and merchants. Geography alone didn't make it powerful, but it made prosperity possible. Trade routes connected Tana to major Greek centers, and archaeological findings reveal imported goods, fine pottery, and status items that indicated a thriving merchant class. For a city said to be founded by displaced Trojans, this was nothing short of remarkable. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Evidence suggests that Tana may have survived longer and in better condition than many nearby cities during turbulent periods of Greek history. Researchers noted that the city prospered during the era of Corinth's destruction by the Romans. According to excavation reports, Tana was spared the violent fate of other cities and may have even expanded during Roman times. Roman-style buildings, new streets, and updated infrastructure appear to have been added in later centuries, offering clues that Tana adapted to shifting empires with surprising resilience. It's rare for ancient cities to rise quietly and endure loudly, but Tana seems to have done exactly that. So, what went wrong? How does a successful city tied to legendary roots and blessed with geographic advantage suddenly vanish so completely that it becomes a ghost in historical records? The truth is, Tana didn't fall in one dramatic moment. Its strengths simply turned into vulnerabilities. There's no evidence of a single catastrophic event, like the destruction layer found at Troy. Instead, archaeologists suspect a slow decline, political changes, shifting economic priorities, population movement, and eventually abandonment. Over time, nature did what nature always does. It reclaims everything. Buildings collapsed, streets filled with soil, tombs sealed themselves under pressure and dust. The once vibrant Trojan descendant city faded into silence, leaving no clear marker of its exact location. It wasn't destroyed. It was forgotten. By the Byzantine era, the name Tana had become a memory. By modern times, even that memory was dim. Archaeologists searched for it, but the landscape had shifted so drastically over millennia that nothing above ground hinted at what lay below. The city became a ghost in the historical record, a place scholars debated but could never locate. And that disappearance only made the legend louder, because cities that die loudly leave ruins. Cities that die quietly leave mysteries. Tana's fall created exactly that kind of void, the kind that calls out across centuries, tempting archaeologists to search for what might still remain. It set the stage for the day when the soil finally split open and revealed that the myth had been right all along. The city had risen, the city had fallen, and now, after thousands of years of silence, the city was ready to show itself again, one dig at a time. Unearthing Tana, the dig that changed everything. Before the world learned of the excavation events, there was the quieter reality of the dig itself, a reality filled with second-guessing, long days of empty trenches, and a team trying to prove a theory that many believed would go nowhere. And that's what makes what happened next so remarkable. Each trench that revealed nothing simply narrowed the possibilities. Shift 5 meters, try a different angle, run ground-penetrating radar again. Look for soil discoloration that shouldn't be there. A dig like this is 90% patience and 10% breakthroughs. For weeks, progress was uneventful. The trench lines formed a grid across the land like scars, each one a question the earth answered with silence. Some members of the team wondered privately if the outcome would be another almost, the kind of dig where hopes run high until the last day when nothing appears. Then the soil changed, just slightly, enough to matter. A strange compaction showed up in one trench, not stone, not clay, something in between. A density that suggested deliberate human activity. At first, the team thought it might be Roman-era foundations or even a later agricultural installation. The only way to know was to widen the cut. What emerged wasn't grand or photogenic. It was a pattern, a straight line in the soil running longer than any random geological formation. The kind of line only human hands create. Straight lines. Archaeologists always say rarely occur in nature. But here's where the dig took its first major turn. The line didn't match anything typical of known Corinthian settlements. This discrepancy triggered a shift in the team's mindset. Suddenly, every soil stain became a clue. Every odd stone became suspicious. The more trenches they opened, the more the anomalies multiplied. Circular discoloration suggested pits or post holes. A slight depression hinted at an ancient roadbed. Even the distribution of small stones began to look deliberate. The site was no longer behaving like farmland. It was behaving like a buried city. What the team didn't know yet was which city, or whether it was significant at all. But the shape of the excavation changed overnight. They expanded the grid. They brought in higher-resolution scanners. Specialists in ancient settlement patterns joined the analysis. And then the dig crossed its point of no return. A cluster of features appeared in one of the deeper cuts. A series of parallel alignments pointing in the same direction. That was the moment archaeologists dread and dream of. The moment the site stops being random. These alignments hinted at streets, actual streets. Still, no one said the word ta, not yet. No one wanted to jinx it. The team's excitement grew, but discipline kept them grounded. They needed proof, not hope. That proof arrived not through artifacts, but through architecture. A foundation trench revealed a building footprint with proportions that didn't match simple farmhouses. The walls were too thick, the angles were too perfect, and the orientation indicated intentional city planning, the kind described in ancient texts about lost settlements. Suddenly, the entire site snapped into focus. Every trench, every line of compacted soil, every faint outline formed the skeleton of a true city grid, a planned, organized urban layout buried intact. And that was the moment the dig officially became a discovery. From that point on, the team worked differently, faster, with more caution, with more reverence. They weren't revealing random ruins. They were uncovering the blueprint of a city frozen in time, a city so well preserved that it felt like its people had simply stepped away for the afternoon, leaving everything behind. But what stunned the archaeologists wasn't just the presence of buildings, roads, and structures. It was the condition of the site. Layers showed no signs of massive destruction, no violent collapse, no signs of fire. It looked as if the city had quietly gone to sleep and let the earth bury it. That kind of preservation only happens under rare conditions, conditions that protect an entire settlement for thousands of years. And that level of preservation is what transformed the dig into something historic. Every meter of soil removed pulled the myth closer to reality. Every structure uncovered shifted the story from legend to fact. Every feature revealed hinted that this wasn't just a city. It was the city, the mythical one, the whispered one, the one scholars argued about for generations. By the time the team stepped back and viewed the site from above, the truth had become undeniable. They weren't unearthing random ruins. They were unearthing Tena, the city hidden for nearly 3,000 years. And archaeology itself would never be the same again. Discoveries that shook the archaeological world. Once the city's outline surfaced and the excavation expanded beyond the first test trenches, Tena began revealing details no one expected. Details that didn't just confirm the city's identity, but reshaped how experts understood the ancient Mediterranean world. Because buried within Tana were clues that shouldn't have survived, but they did. The first shock came from the city's planning. As archaeologists cleared additional sections, they discovered a level of urban organization far more advanced than anticipated for a supposedly minor settlement. Streets met at calculated angles. Drainage systems followed logic found in larger, wealthier cities. Public spaces appeared deliberately placed rather than grown organically over time. Tana wasn't improvisational. It was intentional. This single revelation forced scholars to rethink long-held assumptions. For decades, the narrative held that smaller, ancient communities mirrored neighboring cities in simplified form. Less wealth, fewer resources, slower development. But Tana challenged that hierarchy. Here was a city that operated like it belonged among the greats despite its modest size. A city whose confidence showed in its design. But the surprises didn't stop with architecture. As excavation teams pushed deeper into residential sections, they began uncovering evidence of craftsmanship that suggested a community with specialized trades. Workshops containing tools for metalwork, pottery production, and textile creation appeared across multiple households. Each one pointed to a society that valued skill, precision, and quality. Then came the discoveries that left even veteran archaeologists stunned. Inside one newly uncovered structure, a Roman-era public building measuring roughly 156 square meters. They found an astonishing collection of objects: 18 silver and copper coins, an iron pickaxe, an iron key, a stylus, and ceramics still bearing traces of daily use. It wasn't a ruin. It was a snapshot of life interrupted. But the next revelation was even more dramatic. In a nearby commercial sector, archaeologists uncovered a staggering hoard of 2,100 coins, many dating to the 5th and 6th centuries AD, including pieces linked to emperors like Theodosius, Zeno, Leo I, Justin I, and Justinian I. A single district holding centuries of currency implied a city that endured far longer and in far greater prosperity than anyone had imagined. And the pattern continued. A second building, about 145 square meters, revealed layers of occupation across different eras. Classical period ceramics, miniature vases, lamps, figurines shaped like animals, and 4th century BC Corinthian dramas. Tana wasn't just one city, it was many. Rebuilt and reborn across generations. But the find that shifted the emotional tone of the excavation came from the necropolis near an ancient burial monument. Archaeologists discovered an underground chamber sealed since antiquity. Inside a 1st century BC Corinthian coin and the Fenian bronze, a lamp depicting the god Ares, a glass incense burner, urns, and in the lower chamber, the carefully protected burial of a child beneath a ceramic tiled roof. It was a human story, preserved with heartbreaking clarity. Finally, the infrastructure revealed something astonishing. An 18-meter retaining wall, built from perfectly cut rectangular stones, later converted into a large Roman system, demonstrated that Tana invested heavily in water management. You don't build public utilities like that for a minor settlement. You build them for a city expecting to last. These kinds of discoveries forced archaeologists to rethink the region entirely. If a city, long dismissed as a footnote, possessed advanced planning, specialized industry, long-distance trade goods, layered cultural identities, resilient infrastructure, and wealth spanning centuries, then Tana wasn't a curiosity. It was a revelation. Tana wasn't merely surviving. It was competing economically, culturally, politically, in ways no scholar had anticipated. By the time the excavation team laid out all their findings, the significance was impossible to ignore. Tana wasn't merely a rediscovered settlement. It was a city that rewrote expectations, rewired assumptions, and forced archaeologists to reconsider the entire historical landscape of the region. Its planning surprised them. Its craftsmanship surprised them. Its cultural layering surprised them. Its resilience surprised them. But above all, what shook the archaeological world the most was this. Tana was never just a legend. It was a powerhouse hidden in plain sight. And once the earth gave it back, nothing about the ancient world looked the same again. A mythical city rises after 3,000 years. The moment the final pieces of evidence were assembled, the archaeological community felt a collective shift, a sense that something enormous had just happened. The excavation reports, the artifacts, the tombs, the architecture, and the cultural signatures linking Tana to Troy all pointed to one undeniable truth. A mythical Trojan city had been found, not hinted at, and not loosely suggested, but found. And it had been hidden beneath the soil for nearly 3,000 years, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. Tana wasn't just a lost city. It was the lost city, the missing link between the fall of Troy and the cultural evolution of Greece. For archaeologists, the revelation hit hard. Myths, after all, are rarely expected to walk out of the ground in perfect stone. Yet here was a thriving, planned, wealthy city founded by Trojan survivors, a living continuation of one of history's most famous wars. It forced experts to rethink the Trojan narrative, not as a distant legend, but as an event with real people, real consequences, and real migrations that transformed the ancient world. They finally found it wasn't an exaggeration. It was the truth, a truth buried, protected, and finally uncovered. But perhaps the most breathtaking part of the reveal was its implication. If Tana survived the fall of Troy and thrived for centuries, what else survives in the archaeological record? What other myths are simply waiting for a brush, a tell, or the right archaeologist to bring them back to life? The discovery of Tana didn't just close a historical gap. It opened a door. A new chapter in Greek archaeology had begun, one filled with possibilities that once seemed unthinkable, and for the first time in millennia, the world could finally say the myth was real. And that is why the discovery of Tana mattered more than anyone expected. Because if Tana, a city once dismissed as fiction, turned out to be real, how many other myths do you think are still buried out there, waiting to emerge from history? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Until next time.